In November 2017, a 20-year-old woman walked into a hospital in Tamil Nadu with a problem doctors had rarely seen before. Her hair, once long and healthy, had transformed overnight into a single, immovable mass. The strands had locked together so tightly that no comb, no brush, no amount of patience could separate them. The clinical name written in her medical record was acute hair felting. The cause, documented in the International Journal of Trichology by physicians Maduri and Vedachalam, was a substance her family had trusted for generations: castor oil. The same castor oil that millions of people on social media today are calling a 3,500-year-old miracle. The same castor oil being marketed across TikTok and Instagram as the cure that pharmaceutical companies have hidden from you. The same $2 bottle of oil sitting on grocery store shelves around the world. So which story is true? Is this an ancient secret that the pharmaceutical industry has been silencing for decades? Or is it just another internet trend that does nothing and sometimes harms? The truth, when you actually look at the evidence, is far more interesting than either of those simple stories. Because there is a real, peer-reviewed clinical trial in which patients applied a cheap plant oil twice a day for 6 months, and their hair count significantly increased, at rates statistically equivalent to the FDA-approved gold standard. There is a real reason the pharmaceutical industry has effectively ignored this for the more than 30 years since Minoxidil was approved. And there is a real, evidence-based way to use these natural oils that almost nobody on social media is actually teaching. This is Oracle Prime. Today we are separating the marketing from the medicine, and what we find may change how you think about hair loss for the rest of your life. Section 1. The False Dichotomy. The conversation about castor oil and rosemary oil for hair growth is dominated by two camps, and neither one of them is telling you the whole story. On one side stand the wellness influencers. Their videos rack up tens of millions of views. Apply castor oil nightly, they tell you, and within weeks you will have the thick, glossy hair of an Egyptian queen. They invoke ancient civilizations. They quote prostaglandin pathways from textbooks they have never opened. They flash dramatic before and after photos with no timestamps and no controls. And they tell you, with a straight face, that the medical establishment is hiding all of this from you to protect a multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical empire. On the other side stand the dermatologists, the trichologists, and the skeptical science communicators. Castor oil, they say, is a moisturizer, nothing more. There are no large randomized trials. There is no real evidence. Anyone claiming otherwise is selling you something or peddling pseudoscience. Both groups are partially right. Both groups are mostly wrong. And the truth lives in the gap between them. A gap most viewers never get to see because nuance does not perform well on either side of the algorithm. What follows is not a miracle cure pitch. It is not a debunking either. It is the actual evidence, the actual mechanisms, the actual limitations, and the actual reason a substance with reasonable scientific support has remained on the margins of mainstream medicine for 3 decades. By the end, you will know more about your own hair than 95% of the people reading you advice on the internet. Section 2. What the ancient world actually knew. Let us start with the historical claim, because almost every video on this topic gets the history wrong in the same way. The Ebers Papyrus, a medical scroll dated to roughly 1550 BC and now preserved at the University of Leipzig in Germany, is one of the most extensive medical documents to survive from the ancient world. It contains roughly 700 to 800 medical prescriptions, covering everything from infected wounds to digestive disorders to mental illness. And yes, it does contain 6 specific entries on hair loss treatment, listed as Remedies 771 through 776. But here is what the wellness creators conveniently leave out. The first treatment listed in those entries is not castor oil. It is burnt hedgehog quills mixed with oil, applied to the scalp for 4 days. Other prescriptions in the same section call for the fats of hippopotamuses, crocodiles, snakes, and tomcats. The Egyptians did use castor oil widely for cleaning the body, for skin care, for fueling lamps, and most prominently as a powerful purgative. But the romantic image of Cleopatra dramatically rubbing castor oil into her famously glossy black hair? That image comes from 20th century beauty marketing copy, not from ancient history. There is no primary source that documents her using it for hair at all. It is a story sold so many times that it has begun to feel like fact. Move east and the picture becomes clearer, but also more modest. The Charaka Samhita, attributed to the physician Charaka in roughly the 1st or 2nd century of the Common Era, is one of the foundational texts of Ayurveda. It does treat castor oil, known in Sanskrit as Aranda Taila, as a substance of considerable medicinal importance, but its primary classifications in the text are as a Vedachalam, a therapeutic purgative used to cleanse the digestive tract, and as a Vata pacifier for joint pain, inflammation, and stiffness. It is used externally as a massage oil, and that includes scalp application as part of broader oil therapies. But the herbs ancient Ayurvedic practitioners actually reached for first when treating hair loss were typically bringraj, amla, brahmi, and hibiscus. Castor oil played a supporting role, not a starring one. Selling it as the central Ayurvedic hair tonic is a modern reframing. Where the tradition does hold up most strongly is in West Africa and in the Caribbean. There, a particular form known as Jamaican black castor oil, produced by roasting the beans before pressing, which yields an oil with higher ash content and a more alkaline pH, has been used continuously for generations as a hair conditioner and scalp treatment. Generations of women have testified to its real benefits for moisture retention, scalp health, and reducing hair breakage. That tradition is not a marketing myth. It is documented, lived, and worth respecting on its own terms. So castor oil for hair has roots, real roots. They are simply more modest, more practical, and more honest than the cinematic version that the algorithm tends to amplify. Section 3. The 2015 study that should have made headlines. Now we come to the part of the story that the dermatology establishment has been remarkably quiet about. Because there is a real, peer-reviewed, randomized comparative clinical trial that put a natural plant oil head-to-head against the FDA-approved gold standard for hair loss. And the natural oil more than held its own. In 2015, 4 researchers, Younes Panahi, Mohsen Taghizadeh, Isa Tamazpour Marzony, and Amir Hossein Sahebkar, published their findings in the peer-reviewed journal SKINmed. Their study design was straightforward. They recruited 100 male patients, ages 18 to 49, all clinically diagnosed with androgenetic alopecia, common male pattern hair loss. They randomly assigned 50 of them to apply rosemary essential oil to the scalp twice daily. They assigned the other 50 to apply Minoxidil at 2% concentration, the same Minoxidil that pharmacies sell as Rogaine. Both groups followed the protocol for 6 months. The researchers measured hair counts using standardized photographic assessments at baseline, at 3 months, and again at 6 months. At 3 months, neither group had shown significant change. Hair growth is slow. 90 days is simply not enough time for visible regrowth. But at 6 months, both groups had shown statistically significant increases in hair count compared to where they had started. And here is the finding that should have made headlines around the world. The difference between the rosemary group and the Minoxidil group was not statistically meaningful. the natural plant oil produced hair count results that were, within the statistical power of that study, equivalent to the pharmaceutical gold standard. There was one category in which the Rosemary group clearly outperformed Minoxidil: side effects. The Rosemary patients reported significantly less scalp itching than the Minoxidil patients. For anyone who has actually used Minoxidil long-term, this matters. Itching, burning, and flaking are among the most common reasons people abandon Minoxidil treatment within the first year of starting it. A treatment with comparable efficacy and a gentler side effect profile is, by any reasonable definition, clinically interesting. This is the study the wellness industry references, usually with breathless overstatement and missing context. It is real. It is peer-reviewed. And the results are more striking than the skeptics have been willing to admit out loud. Section 4. But be honest about the limitations. Now, before anyone rushes to a store, the Panahi study has limitations that any honest narrator must acknowledge. Limitations the wellness creators consistently fail to mention. It was a single-blind trial, not a double-blind trial. That means the researchers knew which patients had received which treatment, even if the patients themselves did not. That introduces a real risk of unconscious bias in how outcomes are measured and reported. The sample size of 100 is modest. Larger trials would be needed to establish how robustly the effect holds across diverse populations. The study compared Rosemary to Minoxidil at the lower 2% concentration, but the more potent formulation typically recommended today, particularly for men, is 5% Minoxidil. We do not yet have a head-to-head trial against that stronger dose. And the study was conducted in a single country, in a single population. Independent replication in other populations has been limited. There is also one detail that almost every social media video misses entirely. The Panahi study was about rosemary essential oil. It was not about castor oil. They are not the same product. They have different chemical compositions, different proposed mechanisms, and very different evidence bases. Conflating them, as much of the social media content does, sometimes deliberately, is a major part of how viewers end up disappointed and confused. So what does the science actually say about castor oil specifically? Section 5. What castor oil actually does and doesn't. A 2025 narrative review published in the medical journal Curious surveyed the available literature on castor oil in dermatology and reached a sober conclusion. There are no large randomized controlled trials demonstrating that castor oil grows new hair from dormant follicles. The available evidence base consists of preclinical research, in vitro cell studies, individual case reports, and traditional usage. That is a meaningful gap in the science, and it deserves to be stated plainly. What castor oil does have is well-documented properties as a cosmetic agent for hair and scalp. The oil is composed of 85 to 95% ricinoleic acid, an unusual hydroxylated omega-9 fatty acid that is essentially absent from other common cooking and beauty oils. This unique chemical composition gives castor oil 3 established and useful functions. First, it is a powerful occlusive moisturizer. The thick, viscous oil forms a physical barrier on the hair shaft and the scalp, locking in moisture and reducing the rate at which water evaporates from the skin. Hydrated hair is softer, more flexible, and significantly less prone to breakage. If you have noticed that your hair appears to be growing longer after using castor oil, it is most often because you are losing less length to breakage at the ends, not because you are growing more new hair from the follicle. That distinction matters. It is the difference between protecting what you have and creating what you do not. Second, ricinoleic acid has documented anti-inflammatory properties at the cellular level. A scalp environment with less chronic inflammation is, in general, a healthier scalp. For people whose hair shedding is partly driven by low-grade scalp inflammation, and this is significantly more common than most people realize, reducing inflammation can support better hair retention over time. This is one of the more credible mechanisms by which castor oil might genuinely help certain users. Third, castor oil has mild but real antimicrobial activity. It can suppress overgrowth of certain fungal and bacterial species on the scalp that contribute to dandruff, itchiness, and follicular dysfunction. A cleaner scalp microbiome is part of a healthy hair environment. These are real, useful properties. They are also modest properties. They will not regrow hair on a fully bald scalp. They will not reverse advanced androgenetic alopecia in its later stages, where the follicles have already miniaturized to the point of being effectively dormant. They will not regrow hair lost to scarring conditions like lichen planopilaris, frontal fibrosing alopecia, or central centrifugal cicatricial alopecia. They will not address autoimmune conditions like alopecia areata or alopecia universalis, where the body's own immune system has attacked the follicles. Anyone telling you that a $2 oil will regrow any hair in any condition in 30 days is selling you a story. The reality is more limited. It is also, used wisely, more useful than the dermatology establishment has historically been willing to admit out loud. Section 6. The risks nobody talks about. And there are real risks that the wellness side of this debate tends to skip past entirely. The 20-year-old woman in Tamil Nadu, her case, documented by Maduri and Vedachalam in the International Journal of Trichology in 2017, is not unique. Acute hair felting, that condition in which hair tangles into a single, irreversible mass, has been associated with castor oil use in multiple case reports, particularly when the oil is applied generously to long hair without thorough dilution and without combing through. Once the felting occurs, there is no untangling it. The only treatment is to cut off the affected mass. For a woman who has spent years growing her hair, that outcome is devastating. Contact dermatitis is another real concern. While most people tolerate castor oil topically without any issue, a small but well-documented percentage of users develop allergic skin reactions. Redness, itching, inflammation, sometimes severe enough to require medical treatment. A simple patch test on the inside of the forearm 24 hours before any first-time scalp application is not optional. It is basic safety, and skipping it is asking for trouble. There is also the issue of follicular blockage. Because castor oil is one of the most viscous plant oils on the market, applying it heavily, undiluted, and leaving it on the scalp for extended periods can clog the follicular openings themselves. Paradoxically, this can worsen the very condition you are trying to treat. Pomade acne, sebaceous plugs, and inflamed follicles can all result from overuse. These are not hypothetical risks. They are documented adverse events in the medical literature. They are part of the honest picture that gets erased when castor oil is sold as a universally safe miracle. Knowing them is not a reason to avoid the oil. It is a reason to use it correctly. Section 7. Why Pharma ignored this for 30 years. Here is the question that genuinely deserves an honest answer. If rosemary oil performed comparably to the FDA-approved standard in a peer-reviewed clinical trial back in 2015, with arguably a better side effect profile, why is it not on every dermatologist's recommendation list? Why has the pharmaceutical industry not pursued it? Why has it been, in real terms, effectively ignored for the more than 30 years since Minoxidil was first approved by the FDA in 1988? The answer is not a conspiracy. The answer is a system, and understanding that system is far more valuable to you than any villain story. To bring a new pharmaceutical product to market in the United States, A company typically spends between $50 million and $200 million on Phase 3 clinical trials alone. That figure does not include the earlier preclinical research, the Phase 1 and Phase 2 trials, or the ongoing manufacturing, regulatory compliance, and post-approval monitoring costs. By the time a drug reaches the pharmacy shelf, total investment can easily exceed $1 billion. To recover that investment, the company needs market exclusivity. The legal mechanism that grants market exclusivity is the patent. Patents protect novel synthetic molecules. Patents do not protect plants. You cannot patent castor oil. You cannot patent rosemary essential oil. They have been in the public domain for thousands of years. There is no economic mechanism by which any pharmaceutical company can fund a $100 million trial on these substances and recover its investment. No corporate champion means no Phase 3 trial. No Phase 3 trial means no FDA-approved indication. No FDA-approved indication means dermatologists who practice within evidence-based clinical guidelines cannot easily recommend it as a first-line treatment, even when they personally suspect it might help certain patients. The system funnels recommendations toward what has been formally validated, and formal validation costs money that no one has an incentive to spend on unpatentable plants. This is not a story of villains. It is a story of incentives. The patent system, the FDA approval pathway, and the economics of pharmaceutical research were designed to incentivize the development of novel synthetic compounds, and they do that job remarkably well. New cancer drugs, new immunotherapies, new vaccines all flow from this system every year. But the same system creates a structural blind spot for unpatentable natural products. That blind spot is why a substance that may genuinely help millions of people with mild to moderate hair thinning has remained relegated to the wellness aisle, rather than the dermatology prescription pad. The good news is that the blind spot is, slowly, narrowing. Independent academic researchers, the kind whose careers do not depend on pharmaceutical industry funding, have been gradually building the evidence base for botanical hair treatments over the past decade. In 2024, the Australasian College of Dermatologists formally acknowledged rosemary oil as an evidence-based complementary treatment for mild to moderate androgenetic alopecia. That kind of mainstream medical recognition would have been unthinkable 10 years ago. The shift is happening. It is just happening on a different timescale than corporate-funded drug development. And in the meantime, the conversation has been left to influencers and skeptics, neither of whom have much incentive to deliver the nuanced truth. Section 8. The SMART Protocol. So, how do you actually use this knowledge in your own life? If you are experiencing significant hair loss, sudden shedding, patchy bald spots, a rapidly receding hairline, or hair coming out in visible clumps, your first move is not a YouTube protocol. Your first move is a board-certified dermatologist or a qualified trichologist. Some hair loss patterns are reversible if caught early. Others, particularly the scarring alopecias, are time-sensitive medical situations where every month of delay means more permanent loss. No oil will save you from a misdiagnosis, and no internet protocol can replace a proper clinical examination. For mild thinning, early-stage androgenetic alopecia, or general hair health support, here is a sensible, evidence-aware approach. First, make FDA-approved treatments your foundation, not your enemy. If you have male or female pattern hair loss and you want the strongest evidence-based intervention available, Minoxidil at 5% for men or 2% for women remains the standard for a reason. It works for many people. The downsides are real: scalp irritation, the need for indefinite daily application, and the fact that you will shed any new hair gained if you stop. Finasteride for men is the most effective oral option for androgenetic alopecia, And while it carries its own potential side effect profile, the actual rates of significant adverse effects are far lower than internet rumors suggest. These tools have decades of clinical evidence behind them. They are not the enemy. Treating them as such, on the basis of viral content rather than clinical data, costs people real hair. Second, use natural oils as supportive treatments, not as replacements. Rosemary essential oil, properly diluted in a carrier oil, typically 2 to 3 drops of essential oil per teaspoon of carrier oil, like jojoba or fractionated coconut, can be applied to the scalp 2 to 3 times per week. Castor oil, used sparingly and rinsed thoroughly afterwards, can serve as a useful conditioner and scalp moisturizer between treatments. Always patch test on the forearm 24 hours before any first scalp use. Always dilute properly. Never leave heavy oils on long hair without combing them through, given the felting risk we covered earlier in this video. Third, address the lifestyle factors that drive hair shedding. Sleep, dietary protein, iron and ferritin levels, vitamin D status, thyroid function, and chronic stress all play documented roles in hair health. The most expensive oil in your bathroom cabinet cannot compensate for chronic sleep deprivation, an iron deficiency, or untreated hypothyroidism. A simple blood panel ordered by your physician can reveal far more about why your hair is thinning than any social media protocol ever will. And finally, know when to return to medical care. If your protocol is not producing visible improvement at 6 months, that is itself diagnostic information. Do not just pile on more oils. See a specialist who can identify what is actually going on underneath. Section 9. Closing. The 20-year-old woman in Tamil Nadu, whose hair had felted into an immovable mass and who began this story, did not stop using castor oil after she left the hospital. What she did was learn to use it correctly. Diluted, combed through, briefly applied, never left for hours on long hair without supervision. Within a year, her hair had grown back, healthy and intact, and she had become an example of something the internet rarely teaches: how to integrate traditional wisdom into modern life without becoming a cautionary tale yourself. What she came to understand, and what most of the conversation online still has not, is that the answer to questions about hair health is rarely a binary choice. Castor oil is not a miracle. It is also not a fraud. Rosemary essential oil is not a replacement for medicine. It is also not snake oil. The pharmaceutical industry is not maliciously hiding ancient cures from you. It is also not the only legitimate path to a healthier scalp and stronger hair. The truth is more useful than either extreme. There is a real, modest, evidence-supported case for incorporating these natural oils into a thoughtful hair care routine. There is a real economic and regulatory reason that mainstream medicine has been slow to embrace them. And there is a real cost to your scalp, to your hair, and sometimes to your psychological well-being when you abandon evidence-based treatment in pursuit of a story that promises too much, too fast, too cheaply. 3,500 years of hair tradition did not survive because it cured baldness. It survived because, used wisely, it offered real comfort, real protection, and real care for one of the most visible parts of who we are. That is a more modest claim than the algorithm wants to feed you. It is also more honest. And honesty, in a marketplace flooded with miracle promises, is an increasingly rare resource. The most powerful thing you can do for your hair is not to find the secret oil that Big Pharma has supposedly buried. It is to learn enough about your own scalp, your own genetics, and your own real options that no marketer, on either side of the debate, can sell you a story that costs you your time, your money, or your well-being. Stay curious, stay informed, and stay sovereign.